No worries. Well, I've got the green light from my colleague Bryn to kick off. So once again, welcome everyone. Welcome to this, our fourth panel session, our positive impact panels that we're running at Geovation. My name's Luke. I work for Geovation as the Innovation and Outreach Manager. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of four-strong panel today, which I'll introduce in just a minute or two. But before I do so, I'm just going to plug that housekeeping one last time, just for those that weren't online just a minute ago. We are hosting this on Teams, so please do keep yourselves on mute as audience members, please. And please don't share your camera. By all means, please say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're coming from today, and whether that's the location you're in, the organisation you're coming from. We've seen from the the registration list, it's a really diverse bunch from public, private, third sector. So it's awesome to have you all here on board today. The call's been recorded, so we will be disseminating this after the event and posting it out on our YouTube channel. So yeah, welcome everybody. Right, let's kick off now with an introduction here. So it's a warm welcome once again. This is our fourth panel series. In this series, we're exploring technologies that are transforming the built environment. And the three sessions we've run today have been around the energy sector and how data and digitalisation is playing into that. We ran one on green urban spaces, about the creation and protection of the spaces we live in within urban spaces. And lastly, more recently, last month, was on digital planning for sustainable cities and towns. But this edition, we're turning the lens on, digital twins for sustainable construction. So originating in manufacturing and finding utility in automation in the aviation sectors, I think it's fair to say digital twins have penetrated the world of the built environment. These virtual replicas serve as mirrors of their physical counterparts and offer insights and opportunities for testing, optimization and simulation, revolutionizing urban planning and development, asset management, construction, and all of our sustainability efforts. There are a number of benefits for successful implementation and the use of digital twins in construction projects. This could be anything from automated progress monitoring, resource planning and logistics, safety monitoring, optimization of equipment usage, as well as facility monitoring, management and operation. And the conversation today is going to hopefully explore some of that. There are some significant upfront costs, of course, to implementation of digital twins and setting them up. And it requires highly technical and complex steps. Moreover, there require massive amounts of data to be collected and used from numerous endpoints. But nonetheless, greater adoption of digital twins presents an opportunity to address some of the challenges of the construction sector, and many of which we'll no doubt touch upon throughout this webinar. So before we meet our panelists, I'd just like to say a few words about Geovation. At Geovation, our mission is to bring people together to unlock their potential and address challenges and opportunities for positive impact. It's been launched, it was launched back in 2009, just had our 14th birthday. And, over that time, we've run a number of innovation activities, supporting startup companies, so 150 and counting so far. We've got a community membership, which I'll post the link to later on in the session. So, we've got about 1,800 in the community currently, and that's growing. There's undoubtedly been jobs created, and also, the funding that those startups have gone on to raise beyond our kind of pre-seed funding. So quite a lot of impact there from Geovation over those years. So in terms of what our offering is, we are a community that's open to all. Very much, absolutely, looking from startups through to corporates, academia. It really is a very rich tapestry of community members. So again, a link to join that will be provided in the chat. And if you're not a member, it's worth doing so. There's no hooks to that. You'll get our newsletter, you'll get access to our Slack channels and be able to connect with others that are interested in geo or prop tech. We have 3 accelerator programs that we run, and I'm going to leave that to the end to plug those a bit more, because we do have an open call at the moment for our accelerator program. And of course, we've got our London hub and partner hub network around Great Britain. And the final kind of USP, I guess, to Geovation is our kind of in-house expertise with our tech team and business development team. So really our core aims around launching, growing and supporting innovation in geospatial and property sectors. And we're partnered up with the HM Land Registry on that, who we help by running the PropTech strands to our programme, and Registers of Scotland north of the border too. So that's Geovation, and just one last plug for the housekeeping, because I've been told to do this. Of course, we're on Teams, so obviously please keep yourself muted throughout the conversation if you can, and cameras off, and we are recording this call. So now, without further ado, we're going to come to our panelists, and I'm just going to a brief introduction, please, from the four who are online, and starting with Henry, who's the CEO of Athenophilia. So Henry, over to you.
Hi there, thanks for having us, Luke. So I'm the former head of information management at the Centre for Digital Build Britain, where we ran a number of digital twin demonstrators and projects, as well as the National Digital Twin. And now I'm on the board of the Apollo Protocol and running a digital transformation and communications consultancy. Great to be here.
Fantastic, Henry. Good to have you here too. And Emilia, over to yourself. Emilia is the Associate Director of Digital at Turner and Townsend.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Hello, everyone. I'm Emilia Cardamone, and I'm an associate director within the digital real estate team at Turner and Townsend. I'm specifically focusing on smart building, smart assets, and more the asset management of things. And together with that, of course, like scoping out strategies for digital twins within the real estate sector. Thanks.
Great stuff. Thank you, Emilia. Welcome. And Simon, over to you, who's the Geospatial lead at Jacobs.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Luke. Hi, everyone. Simon Navin. I lead the Geospatial team and function at Jacobs for Europe. I'm also involved in some of our global technical and digital delivery systems, looking at and really passionate about how we deliver connected, large-scale city and urban environments. So really looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Simon. And last but not least, Sue, who's the director at Just Practising. Welcome.
Hello, Luke. Hi, everyone. I'm a bit of an outsider when it comes to digital twins. I've only really been involved in them for a couple of years. I trained as an architect, and then the last 15 years I've been working with manufacturers on digitisation, helping them communicate with architects, and more recently providing structured data to the supply chain, which is a big problem. I also work on the client side with housing associations, helping them with information management and asset management, and how to get the right information out of the supply chain at the other end. And for the last 2 years, I've been on the core team of the Apollo Protocol initiative, which aims to facilitate the development of cross-sector digital twins by developing a common language framework. And I'm now on the board of the Apollo Protocol.
Great stuff. That's excellent. Thank you. Welcome. And once again to the audience, please don't hesitate to say where you're coming from, organisation, and where you are maybe in the world. As I know, we've got some international joiners too, so please do say hello in the chat. So now into the questions. So we've got 4 broad buckets of questions to address. The first one is around definitions and standards. Secondly, we'll be moving on to the drivers and challenges around digital twins. Then we're going to look at the sustainability and the element of that. And finally, moving forwards and next steps in terms of adoption and further use of digital twins. So the first question, and this one I'll come to you first, Henry, is around definitions and standards. And the question is, how do you approach defining what a digital twin is? What is that definition? And how does it contribute to the development of an industry standard?
Excellent question. I have historically, despite having kicked off a British standard for information management in the past, I've not been a huge fan of standards. And that came from a desire to see innovation and growth and just trying new things. And I've come to a middle ground. So I think there is we need to not define, we need to not standardize at a point when we are trying to establish best practice and we're trying to develop the best tools. And I think we are certainly in the built environment still in that phase. However, it can get very confusing for people if they don't know what you're talking about. If you say, I'm doing a digital twin, this is a digital twin, and one is a laser survey and another one is an all singing, all dancing, interactive system that helps you manage your assets very effectively. They're not the same. So I think at this time, the Flex 260, the built environment standard that defines the structure of what a digital twin is useful. And I think as we move through this journey, we will need to get to technical specifications for information exchange as it develops, but we shouldn't standardized before we start, and that balance needs to be maintained. So that would be my overall position. I have more positions on this as well, because I think it's a really it's a complex topic, and I'd be interested to hear what some of our other panelists have to say on this as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Henry, for that. Emilia, I'm going to pass the baton over to you to address that one. You know, how you approach defining a digital twin and what that is to you.
Well, I kind of agree with Henry on this, to be fair, because we can use the Gemini principles, we can use the Flex, we can use the starting of the Apollo protocol and so on, but we are not there yet to see digital twins live. It's all like it seems to me that we're all experiencing different things, and there's different levels of digital twins for everyone. For me, I guess the very important thing for digital twin is that through the digital representation of an asset, then actually you can understand how the asset operates and get to understand predictive maintenance that you could do, and you know, make the management of these physical assets better, more efficient, and more linear, let's say. But I agree with Andy, like we are now in that phase where we are trying to work towards a common definition that we can all apply to a digital twin. But there's so many discussions at the minute happening. So yeah, really looking forward to what the other colleagues here are saying.
Yeah. Thank you, Emilia. So Simon, what's your reflections on those approaches? And as an add-on to that, I guess, what are the key enabling technologies required for a digital twin?
So I think I agree with my colleagues here in terms of particularly Henry's point about not over-prescribing at this point in time. I think for our benefit and for the work that we've been doing, we tend to focus in on purpose. So that helps us define what the digital twin or the digital environment or the connected environment, whatever term we want to use, that tends to then define what it is we actually need to create. So purpose comes first, and what it is we actually want to deliver when we take those digital representations of the physical things or the processes or the concepts or the activities. And then that helps us define really then what we're going to deliver. And I think it's really useful to have top level, high level definitions that describe broadly what digital twins might be. And within that term, I mean all forms of digital twins, whether they're operational, whether they're process, whether they're design twins. But I think you just always got to remember to come back to that core purpose. Why do you want a digital representation of something, and what is it that you want to achieve? And I think that almost then gives you your definition of what your digital twin would be. Yeah. And sorry, apologies, my long answers meant I've forgotten the second part of your question.
No, really, I think that was a nice expansion on it, really. You know, the extension was, you know, what are the key enabling technologies required for a digital twin?
Well, I'll be very short on this one because I'm sure there are other things that the rest of my colleagues would like to add. For me, a lot of it's about the digital and data infrastructure. I mean, there are other things that you can add in, I'm sure, in terms of software analytics and sensors. But for me, in determining that infrastructure that you require to support the transmission of data and the transmission of information in order to get the benefits that you want to realise is one of the key starting points.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon. And Sue, could I ask for your reflections on the other panelists' responses there?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that, you know, when we've got an emerging concept and emerging technologies, it's important not to narrow things down a lot. But I also think it's important not to be vague, and we are very vague. So I want to give you a particular definition. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's a definition by the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, the AMRC. And I like it because it's from a different sector, so it's from manufacturing, and so it makes you think about digital twins being used in a different sector. And this is one of the things the Apollo protocol is trying to get people to do, is talk between sectors. So it's a live digital coupling of the state of a physical asset or process to a virtual representation with a functional output. So live coupling, that means live doesn't mean real time. So there's that whole conversation of what's the coupling, what's the timing. Physical asset or process, so it could be a pump, it could be a whole factory process. Virtual representation, now that not necessarily any 3D information or even any location information, so could just be the dashboard, could just be the data represented in a way, in information way that it can be understood and acted upon. And then the last bit, the functional output. In other words, it has to be, as Simon said, has to be for a purpose. There must be something worth doing from that data. And we've got so much, we create so much data with no purpose. It's ridiculous and very bad for the environment as well. So something to think about. And of course, manufacturing sector already has an ISO. So they're further ahead than us. So it's really interesting to learn from what they're doing and that it's different and that's okay.
Absolutely, that's a great response there. So any further thoughts from the panel before we move on that, Henry?
I really like that focusing on purpose that we've heard about, and this requirement that we know what we're doing. I think fundamentally, for me, digital twins tell a better story in the sense of it's a clearer way of making decisions. Well, we want to make better decisions by understanding how things really are, not how we think they are, whatever that is. And I think that's the core of this, is that we're trying to create better decision making. And maybe that could be AI, it could be on the NASA or the SpaceX latest shuttle, but it could also very easily be the wastewater pump that's in the middle of Wales that should be working and isn't. It's about understanding what's going on holistically and being able to make informed decisions, and I think it's still going to be people making those decisions. Fundamentally, we've had a lot of a conversation around AI in recent months, and I can see that coming in, and we're creating better data sets to enable better decisions, which could lead to further innovation. But I think fundamentally it's that better story that is creating this progress and this process and this kind of this upsurge of interest in just better ways to run your business, because it's not a super technical thing. It's a good story, but it's very clear how the technical interfaces into that. Absolutely.
Simon, would like to chime in there?
No, sorry, can you hear me still?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I was just I thought the definition that Sue provided was excellent. I think it's really important to have that clarity, but equally it's important for us to be able to explore as many options as we can.
Yeah.
Slight tangent. I mean, Sue made the point about it might not necessarily need to be a model or be spatial. I've actually been exploring using digital twin concepts to describe an organization, so to apply to enterprise architecture type approaches using digital twin approaches. So I think there's lots we can learn about how we start to create digital representations of not just those physical assets, and I think that's something that's well worth exploring in our industry.
Great stuff. Well, that's nice, and thank you for posting that in the chat, Sue, as well. So I think we'll move nicely on to the next question then, around drivers and challenges. And Sue, I'm going to come back to you actually with this question. So the question is, what are the main drivers for adoption of digital twins in the construction industry?
Well, I can tell you what I think they ought to be. The first one is building safety. So building safety, so obviously fire and structural safety, post-Grenfell, but also things like damp and mould, which is in the news a lot. There's an awful lot that landlords need to know about their properties, but also obviously all other asset owners. Then the second one is the climate emergency, including energy efficiency. The performance gap is obviously a big thing, and tied into that, other efficiency drivers. So, and I think it's really important. We should be looking at small wins, not just enormous, great big blue sky thinking concepts. And I think that's one of the things that's frustrating about the concept of a national digital twin. Apart from the fact that it makes people a bit scared, it's also not how businesses work. Businesses need to test something out and see whether it provides them with the information and the outputs that they need. So, what are your small interconnected wins? So housing tenancies, for example, massive amount of cost sunk into voids, and you can't go into a flat and find out whether the tenant is there. So is there a way that you can collect information to tell you whether a tenant is absent over a long period of time, so you know that it is a void and you can act upon it? And there's an example of a problem that you could sort out that would produce financial efficiencies, and then it would help you invest in all the other building safety things. So there's some ideas anyway.
Fantastic. Absolutely, Sue. Thank you. And so, Emilia, from your perspective, what are the main drivers?
Well, efficiency is definitely one of the drivers that at least, most of the people are looking at. They think digital twin, okay, I'm going to have something more efficient, like straight away. It's not as easy as that, but definitely something that people think when talking about digital twins. But I agree with Sue here on focusing on the small wins that we can have, and maybe try to find what the purpose is. That's going back to what Simon was saying. Then it serves the purpose and is trying to solve the problems that this purpose is trying to solve. So it could be different things. It really depends on the organization and why they're trying to build a digital twin. I see big drivers, at least from my clients and from my sector, which is real estate. Sustainability is a massive driver at the minute because people are trying to drop down carbon emission, be more efficient and save energy. It's a cost-effective thing to do, but also very good for the environment. So definitely the sustainability driver is what I see at the minute being kind of the top one, together with more efficiency, increased productivity and so on. But again, it needs to serve a purpose. That's really where I stand at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely purpose driven. So Simon, over to you in terms of reflections on those responses and your opinion on, in terms of the construction industry, what are the main drivers for adoption?
So I think safety is the one that Sue mentioned and should be absolutely up there as a priority, together with sustainability and better use of materials and ensuring that we ensure that materials come from the right source. And I think one thing that I think that's really a potential positive is that potential to have greater connection to context through digital twins. I think when we build assets, when we build physical things, we're building them in a place and we're connecting to a local context. Actually, to be able to add a layer of digital connection to that local context can be a real driver for success. So how do we connect with other assets? How do we connect with other networks? How do we connect with other parts of a city or urban or rural environment? I think digital twins can enable us to have a greater understanding of that context and create better connection. I don't think it's something we do very well at the moment, but programs like the National Digital Twin, for example, where we start to look at competing networks, we start to look at dependency across networks and dependency across assets. I think that should be a real driver for success. I think it's something where we can create that greater understanding of context and how we join context together.
Absolutely. Henry, I'd like to draw you in there now to add your reflections on those responses.
If you must.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of build on, I have two. One is emergence. So I think there is, in a world where it's quite difficult to get efficiency and it's quite difficult to improve quality, any opportunity you have is a good one. So I am thinking specifically of the Digital Twin Fan Club podcast we did with Wellington, the city in New Zealand, where they built a digital twin because of the earthquake and the rebuilding and therefore the management, and they were able to just have emergent things come out of them. So they ended up reducing injuries and broken ankles and legs through A&E by simply being able to identify some steps that incidents were being recorded in a specific area, and so they went to investigate. They saw what was causing the accidents, and that emergent property enabled them to make better decisions. And I think that's quite a difficult one for some people, decision makers, to get their head around, that you will just understand it better and things will come out at you. Because on the other hand, I think the other driver is control. I think in the built environment, in construction, there is a real lots of silos. There's a real difficulty in really understanding what's going on beyond your contractual boundaries, which are all created to mitigate risk, but ironically create risk of problems occurring that you have no control over. So I think there is a control aspect on the other side where if you can see it, you can manage it.
Absolutely. So bouncing the question back to you, Henry, just for a bit of an expansion, you've touched on it a little bit there in terms of some of the roadblocks, but if we're looking at some of the blockers for adoption, as seen in other industries like the automotive, aviation and manufacturing, you know, what, in your experience, what are the major roadblocks then? And I'm going to open that to the floor after you, Henry, as well. So.
Sure. I think the roadblocks to digital twins in construction in the built environment are the same that every single other innovation has faced, which goes all the way back to the there was a 1948 construction review that said the problem is the way everything is procured, it's all done in silos and everybody hides in their own little areas, so we can't collaborate. So there is a procurement. It's that we've been saying that for 70 plus years. So, well, no, just under 70 years. So procurement is an issue because you're talking about bringing people together and you're not necessarily paying them extra to get involved in that system. So cost. Cost is a huge barrier because you have a diverse supply chain and you're asking them to do things differently. And without training, that's a huge issue. So I could go through the list, the entire list of all the blockers, but I don't want to steal them. But I'm going to say procurement is the biggest one because that prevents collaboration and we need better skills.
Absolutely. Thank you, Henry. So I'm going to bounce the baton over to Sue for your input on that one.
Yeah, I completely agree on the procurement silos thing, and that sort of affects quite a lot of other things. So I've worked a lot on the availability of structured data about construction products. And as we know, the construction industry is one of the least digitized, in spite of all the hype, right? It really is not digitized. And recent research by the IET that we commissioned showed that construction product manufacturers not only don't supply structured data to the supply chain about their products, they don't even know what it is. And when you ask them about digitization, they think it's about tax returns. So, and another thing that the IET research found out was that only 8% of the manufacturers interviewed had produced BIM objects. So they, you know, these innovations are passing them by, and so actually getting the data about buildings into the system in the first place is one problem that I'd like to flag up. It's a bit of a niche problem, but it is fundamental as well. And the other thing I want to mention is complete lack of understanding of what a digital twin is, which is something you mentioned at the beginning. That's why we always start with the definition. Actually, you know, you can make it worse. And with any technology where an innovation is promoted without a proper understanding and an objective of communicating what it is we're talking about, then what happens is that people at senior level adopt it as the next big thing and throw money at it. And also they'll, you know, may make a pretense of understanding what they're talking about as well. Most people in the construction industry don't need to understand how these things work. They just have to understand what it can do and what the benefits are. And that's what's really difficult to communicate with a new innovation. And unfortunately, when you get a hole like that, a lot of people will come into that hole and fill it up with a load of rubbish. And so there's a communication problem there.
Absolutely. So totally hear you on that one. And it's like chicken and egg, isn't it, really? I just realised I bounced the baton, which you don't do. You bounce the ball or you pass the baton, but I'm going to bounce the ball over to you, Simon, now, just for your thoughts on that and what the others have said so far.
Yeah, great answers. There's also this other thing we obviously need to recognise is, you know, construction, large scale construction, it is complex, it's complicated, it's hard, it's still hard, and probably still harder than it should be, but it is a kind of complex endeavour for us to do. And what we are ultimately trying to do is connect all these multiple different interconnected environments and assets and domains. And one of the challenges we have with that is domains and sectors, specialist areas, they do speak different languages. And one of the hardest things we always face is the fact that often we try and get everybody to speak the same language. We know through society that doesn't work. We manage to translate as a society between different languages and cultures. So actually probably a lot of the effort needs to go on the interfaces and the integration we need to make between those different sectors and those different domains. And we can do that through standards, and we can do that through some of the processes we create. So I think one area where we really can start to remove some of those roadblocks is just really focusing on accepting that domains will work differently, sectors will work differently, they will have some of their own standards, they will have some of their own languages. But where can we do more on how we integrate some of those to move some of the roadblocks out of the way?
Great response. That's excellent. Thank you. And Emilia, any final thoughts on that?
Well, it's really hard to be the last one answering this question after all those great,
even if
after
you
all
expand
those
on
great
something.
answers.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's nothing else, then that's fine. But an expansion or just some further thoughts, really.
Well, I think, we've touched on most of the main blockers and challenges, and definitely the construction industry has not been good at being like at the forefront of change. We are doing our best, if I'm honest. Like, we've seen the changes like in the last 20 years or so, but there's still so much to unlock. And I guess the supply chain and bringing everyone on board and the digital journey, that's potentially the biggest challenge we have. So I kind of absolutely agree with that. But sometimes I also feel that we are hiding ourselves behind that excuse, like, oh, construction industry is a very outdated industry. Well, other industries have done the same, so why cannot we? It's a collaboration piece that we all need to work on together and try to push the boundaries here. That's really something that I know we are trying to do. We're trying to unlock opportunities to discuss these sort of things, to have more documents on it, to create more literature on digital twins, and to try and upskill people on the digital twin. But there's a lot to do still. But at least we made a good start in there. And I think the Apollo protocol really, by bringing together the manufacturing industry with the built environment, that can unlock some good opportunities for us and speed up the process, because they've done it already. So why can't we?
Sure, absolutely. Lots covered there. Some great responses. Any final thoughts from anyone on the panel there?
That's
Yes,
quite enough.
Good to be positive. Good to be positive as well. Yes.
Absolutely.
We've got a long list of what the problems are. Don't worry. If you have any list, we've got a list.
But there we go. In terms of collaboration being key to that, and so much has come out there. So that's great. Oh, no problem. In which case, we'll move on to our third of the 4 buckets, and this one's around sustainability. And Simon, I'll come to you first with this question. So the question is, what are the sustainability challenges of the construction industry, and how can the increased adoption of digital twins help unlock the benefits?
So I think some of the sustainability challenges, I'm sure we as a panel have got a list, and I'll probably pick a few and then come back to the second part. But for me, one of the key ones is resources. How can we improve the use of resources? How can we face the challenge of how much raw material we're using, how much energy we're using, how much water we're using? We are working so hard to try and improve the way we don't deplete our natural resources, but we have to accept that there's still going to be a time when we're going to have to utilize those. So I think that's one of the key things that when we adopt digital processes and we adopt digital twins and we start to look to create some benefits, if we can start to help support and focus on the use of resources and improve how we use resources across construction, and how that then affects the wider context, then I think we'll be kind of approaching one of the key challenges that we face as a society.
Absolutely, definitely. It's a good reply. And so Sue, over to you, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I'd agree that resources is a big problem, and there's obviously a massive waste of materials. I think one of the Apollo protocol hacks that we did earlier in the year was about circularity, and circularity is enabling circularity is very much requires product identification and the identification of materials. So the whole business of labeling and identifying products, which is currently being commercialized, and commercializing information like that too early is a major problem. I think, you know, product labeling, effective product labeling could remove a lot of waste, because it could produce, it could create a route back to the owner of the product. It can identify fly tippers. You can then enable all the other things that come before recycling, like reuse, repair, remanufacture of products and systems, and repurposing of the materials themselves. And there's some initiatives being done by some of the steel manufacturers in that area at the moment. So circularity is one. The other thing I'd mention is the whole performance gap. Because we don't know how our buildings are performing. And actually, in terms of the supply chain right up to the contractor, we don't want to know how the buildings perform, because that puts an onus on us to change our behaviour. So we don't do KPIs because we don't want to know what we did wrong, right? But the client wants to know, because they're paying for it, right? So if we have a new focus on life cycle performance of buildings, long-term monitoring of building performance, and digital twins are part of that, because they can provide the information necessary to make the decisions to enable you to adapt your building to perform better, rather than it being currently with, you know, post-occupancy evaluation, it's did it work, yes or no, who's to blame? And we need to change the narrative of that and start thinking about performance as a long-term thing.
Excellent. And Emilia, I'm going to come to you there on reflections on what's been said, or any additional thoughts in terms of unlocking sustainability benefits and how digital twins are playing into that.
Well, I'm working very closely on to this sustainability method and how to use digitalization to unlock sustainability for clients in general. That's really like my core mission. So I guess it depends if we're looking at construction or more into asset management. It's slightly changed. Digital twins could be used in different ways. When it comes to asset management, which is where I'm focusing more on, not only you could use digital twin to look at embodied carbon, or like trying to use it as a way of monitoring and enabling the circularity that Sue was mentioning. That is absolutely brilliant. But also from a client perspective, I guess the first driver would be like energy consumption and dropping down carbon emission through the energy consumption, because that's kind of like one of the easiest thing to do with sensors and so on. So the energy usage and the waste usage and so on is something that's where we can drop down carbon emission quite consistently and more in an easy way, but because we already have the technology that can support that. So these are kind of the easy win in sustainability and in dropping down carbon emission. But yeah, there's so much can be done from a digital twin perspective to enhance sustainability within buildings or even within the construction site.
Okay, thanks. And Henry, any further thoughts on what's been said, or I've got an expansion kind of question to that? But
so I think there's a whole supply chain here. I was recently speaking to the head of data at Travis Perkins, and they're getting really good at, you know, creating this cascade of data throughout their the products that they sell or the products that they manufacture and then sell and take to site. It's very complex. So some of these products have amazing data, and some are products that don't have amazing data, and it can be very difficult to reconcile. There is a lot of work to do in the data space to understand what resources even are and what they're doing and what impact they have. I mean, right now, I've seen and worked with sustainability consultants, and it's an interview process. They go to site, they speak to people, they look at things, and then they feed it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then it shoots out an answer. And that's just not good enough. That's just not, how is that? How can you decide on a day-to-day basis if you're using resources effectively if you don't understand how they're being used? You've only got this snapshot. So I have some very strong views on that, and I think that better quality data, better data, and access to that data, and a requirement to provide that data by everybody in the supply chain where relevant, which is, again, you know, kind of back to Sue's point, if you don't want to go, you just go super broad and give us all your carbon data, we'll be back to square one. But we need a really strong look at this so that we are, we can, I think the UK is sadly, I say this sadly, I'll tell you why, is sadly world leading in net zero. I say sadly because I don't think we're doing enough, and I think there's way more to do. But you compare us to some other countries and you're like, well, okay, yeah, maybe we are world leading. It's a bit sad, but it's true. So we can continue this with digital twins, and we can continue to build better data sets and demonstrate that you can really understand exactly what's happening with your resources on site, and then make informed decisions about how you deploy them.
Okay, thanks, Henry. So we've kind of focused on the data, and I've seen some chat flying in as well. That's kind of, you know, some questions being asked around that. So there's been an extension on that, I guess. Then, are digital twins the suitable mechanism for relevant data to be exchanged between stakeholders? Is that right or wrong for me to say so? Simon, I'm going to ask you that question. So is that the right mechanism?
Well, I think it's one of many. So digital twins, you know, they can be a suitable exchange mechanism. A digital twin is, in the context that we're discussing, is predominantly something that's supported by a data environment. So yes, they can be something that creates integration and interoperability, but it's the space between those domains and sectors, the integration, the interoperability that facilitates the exchange. And actually, it comes back to some of the questions in the chat. Is actually, you need to focus on the culture around data sharing. You need to have that governance in place. You need to have those principles agreed when it comes to which data is to be shared and which data isn't, and why. And a lot of that will come down to a conversation around value and the value of data. You know, can we leverage the data for economic value, environmental value, public good, societal? All those conversations have to be had more maturely than they're being had currently. We can't have these data silos if we're to create connected digital environments that are there to improve the outcomes of stakeholders, citizens, whoever it might be. So it's a more mature conversation around data sharing requirements and data sharing benefits, I think, rather than us focusing on the technical aspects of sharing, which, let's face it, technology will always resolve a problem eventually. But what we don't get is resolution around some of these cultural challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that. So it's kind of continue with that really. Again, from the chat, I can see the things flying in. There are questions around who owns the data and how do we deal with the data sharing safely. So just continuing that really, Sue, with your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We had the Digital Twin Summit. When was that? Was that June or July? I can't remember.
July.
Thank you. Not that further, not as far away as I think it was. We had George Economides from the Department of Transport on our panel, and he was really keen to say that the department advocates that data should be discoverable, high quality, open, etc. And I think that the problem for us is that we're in a competitive business environment, and we don't necessarily understand the business case for data sharing, and that's why, you know, I mentioned earlier about people focus on monetizing the data itself and keeping that to themselves rather than thinking about how they can collaborate and create more value, as Simon's talking about. And an example of what happens when you don't do that is what's happened with BIM. So the sort of great vision of BIM is a single federated model with everybody sharing data. And a while ago, I saw Professor Phil Bernstein, who's Professor of Architecture at Yale, explain how we don't have one BIM for a project. We have lots of little BIMs. So we have a BIM for this, and we have a BIM. So we have the planning BIM, then we have the construction BIM, well, we have the and depending on the procurement process, which we've described as a barrier, the contractor strips all the data out of the model and puts their own data in it, and then they just hand over loads of rubbish to the asset manager. And so we have a whole load of different models made for different purposes, and that's because of the silos in our industry. I don't think data exchange, which is a problem in and of itself separately, won't be solved by digital twins in and of themselves. It's a much bigger problem than that, which is to do with the nature of our industry. As you've said, got to make the business case for it, otherwise it won't happen.
Absolutely. So this is interesting. It's really kicking off some thoughts and interest in the chat, and I'm going to bounce the ball over to you, Henry, just to to continue that going. Really, just your thoughts.
You're gonna stop me typing, aren't you? That's fine. I think the sitting there rattling away. Yeah, there's a real disparity here, and I think it does come down to what is the output. And as I just said in the chat, that ultimately drawings are still the output. They are now 2D and digitized, and they may be vectors, maybe, but that's still the output of many construction projects. That's what planners need to sign off. That is what goes in front of other regulators. That's what they are required to look at. So there's this need to, I think, unshackle decision making from its past in order to make that better. As Sue says, this is, yes, digital twins will be the solution, the outcome, but to get there, we need to ensure that these organizations, whether it's National Highways, whether it is Anglian Water or whomever, are suitably equipped to make decisions with what they're being presented with. Whereas, they have a machine, many of these people who are serial purchasers of assets or maintainers of assets, etc., they have a machine that is set up to deal with 2D PDFs, and that's what it's there for. So that is, I think, one of the key pivots that we need to deal with.
Okay, thanks. And Emilia, any thoughts on data, the data sharing, and care to elaborate on any of that? Sorry, you're just on mute at the moment, Emilia.
I knew this would have happened. Anyways, just resonating what everyone else has said. Really, I think that governance around the data is key here to unlock future development of digital twins. And so, if we nail that down and we all agree on that, then that's where we would progress in a more faster way. Really. We're not there yet. We know that, like we've heard, different stories here, and to have that governance around the data is absolutely key, because as Simon was saying, ultimately the technology is evolving every day, and we can always find a tool or something that can solve us the problem, but to have the governance in place, that is actually key and vital.
Okay, well that's been a really interesting question. Thank you for all your thoughts. So we're going to move on now to the final question around moving forwards and next steps. So I'll start with Henry with this final question. So with an eye on the future, what are the next steps for the construction industry in terms of increasing the adoption of digital twins? So that one first for Henry, what you feel the next steps are?
The next steps are to adopt a innovation mindset, which is to start small and to look at what you can do. We need our strategies, that these conversations need to go up inside our organizations, whether we are HS2, Lawrence, or we are a small architecture firm. We need to have some conversations and ensure that we are enabling senior decision makers in all of these organizations to make better decisions about data. So there's some education to do at the senior level, and then at the front end, we need to start. I think it doesn't need a massive investment initially. I think it's looking at how you make decisions, how you look at your workflows, and understanding your organization and your projects and your programs and your assets better, so that you can make better decisions in the future. So I'd say start small and educate the senior decision makers.
Okay, I like that. Thank you. Start small and educate. Sue, over to you. What are your thoughts in terms of the next steps in terms of
Yeah, a couple of things. The first one is very specific. That in October, the Building Safety Act comes into force for high-risk residential buildings in terms of things like Regulation 38 and handing over of fire information and so on. And the golden thread of building safety information. Remember that? Well, the golden thread, the final recommendations haven't come out yet, the final regulations, but there is a suggestion that the term digital, which has always been part of the definition of the golden thread, includes, as far as the regulator is concerned, PDFs and Excel spreadsheets. I think this is a massive missed opportunity, completely understandable, because I don't think the regulator necessarily understands what digital is. But if you've got any size of building, we're talking about a massive amount of unstructured information that you cannot handle. I'm sure Emilia would agree. You put it in, you put it on discs, you stick it in your basement, you know, and that isn't a golden thread, and it never will be. It never will be an audit trail. So it must be digitized, but I think what needs to happen is for those people working in the construction industry who do understand what digital is, need to get in the room with the regulator and say to them, we are not going to achieve building safety if we do not have a digitized golden thread, and this is what it must be like. And there are people talking to the regulator at the moment, but for whatever reason, the impression I get is that there isn't enough understanding in that space about what we're talking about. There are lots of people here who know a lot more about structured data than the people in that room, and they really ought to be part of that conversation.
Okay, thanks, Sue. And Emilia, I'm going to come to you next, as I saw, obviously kind of quite engaged with that response. So just for your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, no, I completely agree with Sue here. Like, this is kind of a massive opportunity for us to let everyone understand how actually data can help you manage your building, and then to be compliant with the regulation. Then you need to have data behind it. But to have that kind of conversation with the top level people and the management, that whether it's the government, regulatory environment, or even within our organization, to unlock those kind of opportunities to talk and to let people understand how this important is for the future, and that is not an investment for the sake of it, but actually will make things more efficient, faster, and better in the future. That's what we all need to do, really. I think we can all be kind of cold in this situation where we actually need to be more pioneering in this space than what we are thinking we're doing. We need to go a little bit the extra mile potentially. Fortunately, unfortunately, that's open to discussion. But I guess we've done a lot already, and so to crack on with what we're doing and trying to unlock discussions with people that are not necessarily into the data space, or that not necessarily think digital is kind of something that we really need to do. We need to do more on the educational piece, really.
That's interesting. Thank you. And Simon, final thoughts on what's been said so far there?
Yeah, I think agreeing with the panel, the data piece is so important. So talking about the value that can be created. I think I was reading something last week that looking at some smart city projects, just reviewing some use cases. That's where my interest is, in that kind of operational element of cities and places. We collect so much data now. We seem to have moved the dial to let's just collect everything, and we use about 5% of it, and 95% of it sits in a box. We need to change that. We need to collect the right amount of data and use as much of it as possible, because at the moment we are just storing up problems further and further along the future. I think, as Sue said at the start, collecting data is expensive. Collecting data isn't great for the environment. We're wasting a huge amount of time. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. collect it all. So we've got to be really focused on what we need, when we need, and how we leverage the value from it. And we do that by having good conversations about business cases and the economic case, and really talking about the value that we create and the outcomes that we want from creating these connected digital environments.
Absolutely, Simon.
And that goes back
great.
to Emilia's point about having conversations with the right people.
Absolutely, and goes back to your kind of purpose-driven points that you were making earlier in the call as well, I believe. So we're coming towards the end of the call, but I'd like some kind of final remarks now, really, to summarise any final thoughts. And I'll come to yourself, Sue, for those, please.
Yeah.
Around anything that we've discussed, yeah.
The construction industry is a business. It's a whole load of interconnected businesses. So we've got to stop this buzzword thing and this "we know what this is and you don't" thing, which there's too much of in this space, and focus on the practical requirements and the use cases. As Simon has said, you know, when could a digital twin of some kind, of any kind, help you get the information you need to be more efficient to solve this problem? And that's and wherever you can, start with the problem and not the solution looking for the problem. That would be my recommendation.
Definitely. Music to my ears, that one, absolutely. And Emilia, I'll come to you next. Your final thoughts.
I love what Sue just said in there. Is basically addressing the start with the end in mind, and, you know, what you want to achieve, and think about the problems, what we're trying to solve. That's literally the start. I guess for me, one thing I'd like to say to all the audience, or in general, is just like, let's try to convene together and to be more cooperative in this. There's already spaces where this is happening, like the Digital Twin Hub and so on, but get more involved in those type of discussion and help us drive the change within the industry. I guess, that's really what my remark would be, like, get more involved in this type of conversation. Don't wait for someone to tell you what to do, but be at the forefront of it.
Absolutely. Final remarks, Henry, Simon? Either or. Simon, come to you first.
Okay, I'm going to go back to something that Henry said earlier, is, you know, dig deep into the problem and try and solve them one at a time. I think be really focused on the things that we can solve. Don't try and do too much, because I think what we're not very good at, I think, when it comes to this, is really proving those benefits and those values and those outcomes that have just been discussed. And we, you know, talking about the end in mind, but just be really focused on solving some problems and solving them quickly and getting some answers. And if we can't solve them, move on to try and solve something else.
Absolutely, like that. Thanks. And Henry?
I've been thinking about this one. So I think a touch of humility is needed. I think there is, slightly to Sue's point, I've worked in, you know, the built environment and construction sector for a long time now, and there is a very strong aspect in some meetings that I've been in when everybody knows what's going on, everything's totally under control, shut up, sit down. And I've always been really bad at just believing people when they tell me that. And I've realized that they may not at all times know that. And I think we need to be a little bit humble in understanding that we don't know how the sector really works. It's an absolute miracle that it does work, frankly. But reach out. You know who knows. You know who you work with on a day-to-day basis. The best things that I've ever done, and the best things that have ever happened to me in the built environment, have been through collaborating with people I wouldn't have spoken to normally. And reach out, talk to people, ask questions. You know, I'm summing up everyone else's summary, and I apologize. You know, do it. It all starts with a conversation, ultimately, because nobody can do this alone. So reach out, talk to people, ask the question, and know that these problems aren't solved. There is a lot to do.
Absolutely echo that, and just love everything that you've added there. I'd love to take this opportunity to thank the four panelists for a really great conversation this afternoon. Thank you, Henry, Simon, Emilia, and Sue. Let me just finish with some concluding remarks from Geospatial, with a bit of a shameless plug. As I mentioned at the start of the call, we have our accelerator program, which we have an open call for at the moment, seeking applications from early stage startups So absolutely, we've got 2 tracks with the accelerator, one being PropTech, which is HM Land Registry, and the other Geotech. We will absolutely be looking at startups that are looking at digital twins potentially. So if there's anyone on the call or you're able to sort of share that for us, any promotion would be warmly appreciated. It's a really interesting program with, you know, up to £20,000 as an equity-free grant that you get as a startup. So it really is quite an attractive way to support early stage businesses. So the link to that's going in the chat. One of my colleagues is posting that. The second thing really to plug was around this kind of innovation service offering that we're offering at Geovation too. So yes, we're focusing on startups, absolutely, but we're also looking up the value chain as well with corporates and other businesses ultimately, running innovation challenges, geo sprints and hackathons. And you know what was being spoken on the call there in terms of the problem, owning the problem. It's something we've preached for many years at Geovation with our really simple formula: innovation equals problem times solution times execution. So giving an even weight to all of those things. It's so often we like to get towards the solution, with digital twins maybe being one of those things. It's the tech, it's the fun part, it's the bit that everyone wants to get to, but let's really understand the problem. What are the problem statements around that? So really, we really use that formula with all the work that we do, from startups through to corporate. So again, just wanted to plug those innovation services that we provide. And there's a link to a brochure going in the chat on those as well for anyone interested in what we do. And the final thing really was just joining us as a member. Again, I said at the beginning of the call, it's an open community, open to all. There are no hooks. It doesn't cost anything. It's you'll get our newsletter. You can get access to our startups and wider community on Slack. And ultimately, if you're in London at one of our partner hubs, get access to some desk space and support in those cities as well. So it's a nice offering, and yeah, absolutely look to welcome any new members. And so that is a wrap for today, folks. We'd just like to once again thank you all for joining. I hope you've enjoyed it. Look out for the next session. I think it's planned for September.